What if the greatest weapon of World War II was not a bomb, not a tank, nor even a soldier's courage, but a belief? A belief that freedom itself could be built, rivet by rivet, on the factory floors of America. April 15, 1943, 20,000 feet above the French coast, thunder echoed through the clouds. Major Donald Blakesley gripped his control stick as the enemy came into sight, the feared Focke-Wulf 190. When he pressed the trigger, 8 Browning .50 caliber machine guns roared to life, turning the sky into a storm of fire. In that moment, a new era of warfare began. Germany believed perfection would win. America believed people would. And that faith, carried on the wings of the P-47 Thunderbolt, would reshape not only the war, but the destiny of freedom itself. To understand how a single aircraft could change the course of World War II, we must look beyond the clouds, to the ground where it was born. In the factories of New York, Michigan, and Missouri, ordinary Americans worked day and night, forging the steel sinews of liberty. They were not soldiers, yet every bullet they made, every rivet they tightened, became a silent act of defiance against tyranny. While Nazi Germany pursued technical perfection, the United States pursued possibility. Engineer Alexander Kartveli, a Georgian immigrant, dared to imagine an aircraft so heavy it seemed absurd, so powerful it seemed unstoppable. The P-47 Thunderbolt. It was more than metal. It was a symbol of American industrial faith. This is the story of how the roar of the P-47 became the voice of a nation. A story where firepower met freedom, and freedom won. The story of the P-47 Thunderbolt begins not in the sky, but on the ground, in the humming heart of American industry. In 1940, as the clouds of war gathered over Europe, a quiet man named Alexander Kartveli walked through the noisy factory floor of Republic Aviation in Farmingdale, New York. The air smelled of oil, steel, and ambition. Kartveli, a Georgian-born immigrant who had fled tyranny, understood something few others did, that freedom was not defended only by soldiers, but by those who built the tools they carried. Germany's aircraft were masterpieces, light, elegant, and efficient. Their engineers chased perfection measured in grams, every screw placed to balance precision with performance. But Kartveli saw a different path. He believed that in this war, survival would not come from elegance, but endurance. He envisioned an aircraft that could take hits, strike harder, and return home no matter what. And so, the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt was born. A metal giant, heavier than anything the Germans dared to design, but with a heart of unstoppable power. The Thunderbolt was not just a fighter plane, it was a statement. It declared that America's strength lay not in a few flawless machines, but in the millions of hands that built them. Where Germany had craftsmen, America had citizens, workers, mothers, fathers, and dreamers, united by a belief that democracy itself could outproduce dictatorship. The first prototypes were monsters of steel, over 12,000 pounds empty, nearly 18,000 fully armed. Even British pilots laughed at it, calling it the 7-ton milk bottle. But Kartveli and his team were undeterred. They saw beauty not in lightness, but in power. In the idea that an airplane could carry 8 Browning .50 caliber machine guns, each one capable of spitting freedom into the skies. This philosophy, maximum firepower through maximum production, would come to define the American war effort. It wasn't just about building an airplane. It was about building a system that could produce victory faster than the enemy could destroy it. Across the Atlantic, German engineers obsessed over precision. They believed their technological superiority guaranteed dominance. They built fast, maneuverable fighters, the Messerschmitt Bf 109, the Focke-Wulf 190, each a marvel of design. But they were fragile jewels in a war that demanded steel hammers. Germany measured war in perfection. America measured it in potential. In the vast assembly halls of Republic Aviation, women in bandanas and overalls worked beside men, their hands guiding rivet guns under the roar of machinery. Sparks flew like fireworks, echoing the heartbeat of a nation at war. Every shift, every turn of the wrench carried a silent message to the front lines. We are with you. By 1943, the Farmingdale plant was producing 1 P-47 every 4 hours. Out west, the Lake City ammunition plant in Missouri was creating 1.6 billion rounds annually. The numbers defied imagination, an entire nation working as one vast machine. This was the secret Germany never understood. The true weapon of the United States was not the plane itself, nor the pilot who flew it, but the unbroken line of production that stood behind them. A chain of effort stretching from Detroit to the English Channel. Cartvelli's Thunderbolt carried 8 Browning machine guns, 4 on each wing. Together, they delivered a storm of bullets so dense it was said that nothing could survive within its path. But beyond the metal, there was meaning. Each bullet, each bolt, each rivet symbolized the will of a free people. The P-47's thick armor made it nearly indestructible. Pilots called it the Jug, short for Juggernaut. It could dive faster than any German aircraft, its massive Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine howling like thunder as it tore through the clouds. To the Luftwaffe, it was an enigma. To the Allies, it was salvation. When the first squadrons of the 56th Fighter Group arrived in England, they were skeptical. The Thunderbolt looked too big, too heavy, too American. But when they took it to the sky, the world changed. The 8 guns roared in unison, spitting a storm of lead that tore through enemy aircraft. The first kill came on April 15, 1943. Major Donald Blakesley's victory over a Focke-Wulf 190. That moment echoed far beyond the skies of France. It was the turning of a tide, a signal that the era of German dominance was ending. Cartvelli's vision had become reality. A flying fortress in single-engine form. The Germans laughed at first, then they stopped laughing. Soon, American pilots began to notice something remarkable. They could take damage and keep flying. Bullet holes riddled their wings, oil leaking from punctured tanks. Yet the Thunderbolt brought them home. Pilots began to trust it like a brother, calling it a plane that refused to die. Meanwhile, back in Farmingdale, the production lines never slept. Day blended into night as shifts changed, lights flickered, and the rhythmic hammering of industry continued. The workers didn't know the names of the pilots, and the pilots didn't know the workers. But together, they were writing history, one P-47 at a time. As the skies of Europe filled with thunder, the world began to understand a new kind of warfare. It was not the sharpest sword that would win this war, but the one forged fastest, strongest, and in greatest numbers. And so, the philosophy of American industry, abundance over austerity, cooperation over control, became the foundation of victory. Cartvelli once said, "You can build a machine to perfection, but you cannot build perfection without people." Those words defined not just a plane, but a nation. From the smoke of the factories to the roar of the engines, the birth of industrial firepower marked the dawn of America's unstoppable rise. A promise to the world that freedom, once built, could never be broken. April 15, 1943. The clouds above France trembled as the 4th Fighter Group met the enemy for the first time. The massive Thunderbolts, heavy and defiant, cut through the mist like flying anvils. Major Donald Blakesley saw the gray shadow of a Focke-Wulf 190 rise from the clouds below, sleek, deadly, confident. For months, German pilots had mocked the Americans' new machine. But that morning, mockery met metal. At 300 yards, Blakesley pulled the trigger. 8 Brownings erupted in unison, their rhythmic roar shaking the cockpit. To the German pilot, the tracers looked like a beam of solid light cutting through the air. A heartbeat later, his aircraft shattered, wings torn apart, engine aflame. That day, the P-47 scored its first victory. But more than a kill was achieved, a message was sent. The Germans now knew the clumsy American giant could strike harder, faster, and longer than they ever imagined. The sky had changed forever. While the Luftwaffe clung to doctrines of precision and efficiency, American pilots embraced a new philosophy: overwhelming firepower. The P-47 didn't rely on a single perfect shot. It created storms of bullets that turned the air itself into a weapon. German pilots called these zones kill corridors. To enter them was suicide. The difference in philosophy was staggering. A German fighter carried 2 cannons, each with a few hundred rounds. A P-47 carried 8 machine guns with 2,800 rounds in total. German pilots fired in short, measured bursts, 2 seconds, maybe 3. American pilots held the trigger for 5, sometimes 10 seconds, long enough to erase an enemy from existence. Lieutenant Colonel Francis Gabby Gabreski once said, "We didn't need to be better shots. We just needed to put our sights on them and hold the trigger down." It was brutal, effective, and efficient in its own way, the embodiment of industrial warfare in the skies. As more P-47 squadrons arrived in England, the rhythm of the war began to shift. The roar of Pratt & Whitney engines became a daily chorus over the countryside. British farmers looked up from their fields to see the silver shapes glinting against the clouds, a promise that help had come. To the Luftwaffe, however, these new machines were a nightmare. The FW-190, once the terror of Europe, began to lose its edge. Above 20,000 feet, the German BMW engine gasped for air, while the P-47's turbo supercharger roared with full strength. German pilots who once attacked bombers with impunity now faced opponents who could climb higher, dive faster, and take twice as much punishment. When the Americans arrived in large formations, squadrons of 16, wings of 50, sometimes hundreds, the sheer volume of lead in the sky made traditional dogfighting obsolete. A German ace once described it: "It was like flying into a storm where every drop of rain could kill you." The Luftwaffe responded with desperation. They altered tactics, diving low, rolling fast, striking from the sides. But even then, the Thunderbolt's armor absorbed punishment and returned fire with vengeance. By August of 1943, the P-47 had become the backbone of the 8th Air Force. Its pilots escorted bombers into enemy territory, covering them with relentless precision. On missions like the Schweinfurt-Regensburg raid, American fighter groups tore through German interceptors before turning back only when fuel tanks ran dry. Even then, their presence forced the enemy to adapt, to wait, to hide, to fear. The Germans soon realized their real enemy wasn't just in the air. It was the factory system behind those Thunderbolts. The endless stream of planes, engines, and ammunition that no bombing campaign could destroy. Each downed P-47 was replaced within days. Each bullet fired was replenished within hours. It was war by mathematics, and the numbers favored freedom. The statistics tell a story of scale, but behind every number was a human heart. In cockpit footage, you can see it. A pilot's hand trembling before battle, the flash of tracers slicing through cloud, the faint smile after landing alive. Many of them were barely 22 years old. They had grown up through the Great Depression, believing in work, fairness, and the promise of democracy. Now they fought for those same ideals thousands of feet above foreign soil. One pilot wrote in his journal, "When I fire, I'm not just shooting metal. I'm shooting for every worker who built this plane, every mother who sent her son to war, every child who deserves to grow up free." That sentiment carried through every mission. The roar of the Thunderbolt wasn't just sound, it was faith made mechanical. The skies over Europe became an arena of ideals. Germany fought for domination. America fought for deliverance. Every time a P-47 rose into the clouds, it carried more than ammunition. It carried the moral weight of a nation that refused to surrender. By late 1943, the Allies began to push deeper into occupied Europe. Thunderbolt struck not only enemy fighters, but also railways, convoys, and supply lines. They became the bridge between air superiority and ground victory. Trains burned, convoys shattered, and communication lines vanished under waves of fire. The Germans called it Der Donnerhammer, the hammer of thunder. For pilots like Robert S. Johnson, the Thunderbolt was both weapon and miracle. On June 26, 1943, his P-47 was riddled with over 200 bullets. Oil streamed across his canopy, controls jammed, oxygen leaking, yet the machine refused to die. Johnson guided it back to base, shaking, exhausted, but alive. When he stepped out, his ground crew stared in disbelief. One of them whispered, "This plane must have been built by angels." The legend of the Thunderbolt grew with every sortie. It wasn't the fastest, nor the most agile, but it was relentless. It endured where others broke. It fought not with grace, but with purpose. And in that purpose, the spirit of America found its wings. As the war raged on, the German aces began to fear the sound of approaching thunder. The distinctive whistle, air rushing through gun ports as the P-47 dove, became a symbol of terror to those on the ground. Soldiers dove for cover at the faintest hum in the sky. The Thunderbolt had become more than a fighter. It was psychological warfare, a constant reminder that the tide had turned. In that transformation, from doubt to dominance, lay a deeper truth about the war itself. This was not merely a contest of machines, but a conflict of philosophies, the rigid precision of tyranny against the flexible abundance of democracy. One fought for empire, the other fought for everyone. And so, when Major Blakesley and his men looked out from their cockpits over the burning landscape below, they were not just witnesses to destruction, they were witnesses to rebirth. The skies of fire were not only the battlegrounds of World War II, they were the furnace in which the promise of freedom was reforged. Beneath the thunder of the P-47, another war was being fought. Not in the skies, but on the ground, in the glowing forges and echoing hangars of America. In Missouri, the Lake City ammunition plant thundered day and night. 20,000 workers, many of them women, moved like clockwork under the steady hum of machinery. Their hands guided belts of shining brass into presses, stamping out cartridges that would soon roar from the guns of Thunderbolts. Each bullet, no larger than a finger, carried with it the weight of freedom. In New York, the Republic Aviation factory stretched like a steel cathedral. Conveyor belts moved slowly, carrying half-assembled fuselages beneath bright overhead lights. The air smelled of oil, aluminum, and determination. From dawn until midnight, the clang of hammers and the hiss of welding torches filled the halls. Workers spoke little, the noise was too great, but their silence was sacred, the rhythm of purpose. It was here, in these temples of industry, that the spirit of democracy proved itself stronger than tyranny. While the Germans built with fear, the Americans built with faith. In Germany, the war machine ran on the backs of forced laborers, prisoners, slaves, and the desperate. Factories were dark, cold, and filled with hopeless faces. Every hammer strike came from exhaustion, not conviction. In America, the war effort drew its strength from hope, from the farmer's daughter in Kansas riveting fuselages, to the retired mechanic in Detroit inspecting machine guns, to the black women of Alabama who assembled ammunition by the millions. They were not coerced, they volunteered. They did not build out of fear of punishment, they built out of love. Love of family, love of country, love of freedom. President Franklin Roosevelt had once promised that the United States would become the arsenal of democracy. By 1943, that promise had become reality. The numbers were staggering. More than 400 P-47s rolling off assembly lines every month. 10 billion rounds of ammunition produced by war's end. To the German high command, such figures were incomprehensible. Their entire ammunition industry could not match what one American plant achieved. The Lake City plant alone produced 1.6 billion rounds in a single year. Every piece was measured within 1,000th of an inch. Anything imperfect was melted and remade. The standard of quality came not from orders, but from pride. The Germans, relying on scattered factories and slave labor, could not hope to equal such precision. As their plants were bombed and their workforce crumbled, the Luftwaffe faced shortages so severe that by 1945, many fighters took off with only half their ammunition. Across the ocean, the American supply chain moved like a living organism. Ammunition, engines, and spare parts flowed across the Atlantic in endless streams. At forward bases in England, pilots found crates stacked higher than hangars, labeled Lake City, Farmingdale, Evansville. Each box was a quiet promise. You will not run out. Every squadron of P-47s maintained 500,000 rounds in reserve. Every field had engines ready for replacement, wings ready for refit. A damaged Thunderbolt could be rebuilt in days, sometimes overnight. The Germans cannibalized wrecks to keep their planes flying. The Americans rebuilt them stronger. That was the power of a free nation. Freedom was not an abstract word, it was logistics made holy. And behind every number stood a human face. Rose Willil Monroe, a young widow from Michigan, became one of the Rosie the Riveters who built P-47s at Willow Run. She worked double shifts, sometimes sleeping in her car between them. Years later, she would recall, "Every rivet I drove, I thought of my husband, who never came back from France. If one of my planes brought another boy home, then I'd done my part." There were thousands like her. Women who had never touched a wrench before the war, now wielding drills with precision that rivaled any engineer. African American workers, once barred from defense industries, became indispensable. Their work proved beyond doubt that democracy's strength lay in inclusion, not exclusion. While Nazi Germany enslaved millions to feed its war machine, America empowered millions to fight back, not only on the battlefield, but on the assembly line. By late 1943, the results were undeniable. Every day, more than 200 P-47s took to the skies. Each carried nearly 3,000 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition. Together, those sorties unleashed over 300,000 bullets daily, more than the entire German fighter corps received in a week. This was not excess, it was assurance. It was the mathematical expression of liberty. German intelligence reports at the time described the phenomenon with disbelief. One analyst wrote, "The Americans fight as if they fear running out of nothing." He was right. The Americans feared only failure, and failure was no longer possible. When the Thunderbolts began striking railways and supply depots across occupied Europe, the impact was immediate. Trains burned, locomotives exploded, and entire sections of track vanished under a storm of fire. By December, German troops avoided rail movement during daylight altogether. Within the command circles of the Reich, the phrase P-47 sector became synonymous with certain destruction. Yet behind every explosion was the steady heartbeat of industry, the millions of hands that made it possible. They were the true soldiers of production. They did not wear uniforms, yet they fought with courage of a different kind. They fought fatigue, loneliness, and loss. They stood in lines for ration sugar and gasoline, then returned to 12-hour shifts because somewhere, a pilot was waiting for the plane they were building. The Thunderbolt was more than an airplane. It was a covenant between citizen and soldier. It said, "We will give you everything you need to fight and bring you home." In the ruins of German cities, another truth emerged. Factories that once built war machines now stood silent, their machinery twisted and broken. The Reich had built its empire on fear, and fear, like steel, corrodes. America built its strength on trust, and trust, like freedom, endures. That difference defined the outcome of World War II. While tyranny consumed itself, democracy multiplied. The P-47 became more than a weapon. It became proof that the collective power of ordinary people could change the course of history. Every rivet, every bullet, every flight hour was an act of faith. Faith that freedom, once built, could withstand any storm. When the Thunderbolts roared over Normandy on June 6, 1944, their guns flashing like lightning, it was not only the invasion of a continent, it was the culmination of a promise. From the factories of Detroit to the beaches of France, the arsenal of democracy had come to life. A living machine powered not by oil or steel, but by belief. And in that belief, the world saw something extraordinary, that the human spirit, once united by purpose, could manufacture not only weapons, but victory itself. When the guns finally fell silent in Europe, the skies that once burned with fire were clear again. The smoke drifted away, and beneath it lay the scars of a world reborn. The P-47 Thunderbolt, that immense thunderous machine, had written its legacy not only in the ruins of the enemy, but in the hearts of those who believed in what it stood for. It was more than metal. It was a declaration that free men and women, united in purpose, could outbuild tyranny, outlast fear, and outfight oppression. In the end, the real victory of World War II was not only military, it was moral. Germany had built its machines with chains. America built hers with choice. Every rivet, every bullet, every flight was an act of will. The will to remain human in an inhuman time. From the roar of the P-47's 8 guns to the hum of factories that never slept, the United States proved that freedom itself could be engineered. The arsenal of democracy was not just an idea. It was a miracle made by millions of hands. The statistics tell one story: 15,000 Thunderbolts, 10 billion rounds, thousands of missions. But history remembers something deeper. It remembers the courage of workers like Roswell Monroe, who built planes she would never fly. It remembers the young pilots, their hearts steady as thunder, who faced the sky and never came home. It remembers the unity of a nation that refused to let fear define its destiny. As time passes, we must remember that the thunder was never just in the engines. It was in the people, in every soul that believed liberty was worth building, piece by piece, until the world could breathe free again. That is the legacy of World War II. Not the destruction, but the reconstruction. Not the hatred, but the hope. And today, as the world once again trembles between division and unity, between silence and courage, the question returns to us. If they could build freedom in the face of fire, what will we build in the face of fear? Because the fight for peace never ends. The fight for justice never sleeps. And the fight for freedom, the truest legacy of World War II, belongs to all of us. So let their thunder echo again, not in war, but in remembrance, not in destruction, but in determination. Like, share, and speak your truth. Because history was never meant to be forgotten. It was meant to be continued.